or the next 6 months. They had the thing that I needed. And then, and it was just so miraculous that people would start coming back to me and saying, because I introduced them to a hypnotherapist or an acupuncturist or a naturopathic doctor, that they were still alive when they were told they wouldn't live. So when you look at the bigger picture of your life, you know, it's kind of like this time of year. What's your favorite movie? It's a Wonderful Life, right? Isn't it? It's got to be everybody's all-time favorite movie, because it really is so poignant. It brings us back to that point of knowing. We don't even recognize the people that we interact with or the people that we touch along the way. And I hear stories from people years later. I was in a restaurant with a new client over in Walnut Creek, and this young woman was our waitress. And she said, "Sharon, you don't remember me?" Well, you know, I was speaking to about 100,000 people a year. I mean, recognizing one person is probably not that easy, right? And I said, "Well, you have to remind me." And she said, "I was at your brother's wedding, and you told me I had two choices, that I could keep living my life the way I was and never see my children again, or I could get my act straight." The next month she divorced her husband, she got off of drugs, and she was working at a really nice restaurant in Walnut Creek where she was able to make more than enough on her own to take care of her two kids. And she pulled out a picture of the little girl who was then 6 months old when I met her, and now 9 years old. And she said, and I get body chills when I tell these stories, because that simple smile that you share with someone walking down the street, or opening the door for somebody who doesn't suspect that anybody's going to do anything for them that day, those little things are like little miracles in people's lives. And I think that we all have a responsibility to the world that we live in. How do we make it a better place? What is it that we can do to make somebody else feel a little bit better about their lives? I bet every person you meet has a smile on their face just because of your personality, right? And the fact that you're daring enough to be who you are. And most people hide behind what they think other people think they should be. They want to fit. How many of you work in corporate jobs or ever have, right? I had a client, Jerry, and I met Jerry. We were trying to figure this out. I think, you know, Jerry's like 6'5", very imposing. And I went over to this event. It was called 40 Plus. Have any of you ever heard of 40 Plus? It's an outplacement service for people over 40 years old. And I felt it was kind of my civic responsibility to go out and speak to people who had lost their jobs, to try and encourage them to find something that would be heartfelt, something that they could do that would be passionate for them. And so Jerry greets me at the door, and we go up the stairs. It was 8 o'clock at night, which is not a fun time to start, because I knew I wouldn't be on until 9 o'clock at night. And these were all unemployed people, so there was no reason in the world to be that late. But, you know, it's like, okay, you just kind of roll with it. And we go into a room that was half this size, and there were 35 people in the room. And I was backed up against the window, and there were people sitting at my feet. And frankly, that's not a good way to be able to speak. A little claustrophobic. I literally could not move a foot either way. I was kind of stuck right where I was. So I was so nervous about not having the space, not having the ability to move around, that I ended up forgetting all my stories. And I've got lots of great stories. I have stories that appeal to almost any audience that will help them feel more comfortable about who they are. Couldn't remember stories, but all these things about health issues kept coming up, and I couldn't figure out why. So I was done, and this man came up to me afterwards, and he said, you know, you were talking to me personally. And that was the first time that I actually recognized that a lot of times when I'm speaking, I don't know what I'm going to be saying, but whatever I'm saying is right for someone or maybe multiple people because it's what they needed to hear at the time. So Jerry was a little, if I say indifferent, I'm being very kind. He didn't really like me, and we never figured out why, but he didn't like me. And 3 years later, he comes into my Elite Leads business development group. And that's where I met Ruby. She was actually one of my clients. And he came in and he sat down at the meeting and his feet crossed straight out. You know, he had nowhere like under the table he could hide his feet. So he just, you know, legs straight out, arms crossed the entire meeting, all the body language that said he's not engaged. And I walked up to him and I said, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. And he reaches in his pocket and he hands me a check for $500 because that's what members paid me. I was so surprised. He had made up his mind before he even went that he had to work with me even though he didn't like me. He knew I had something that he needed. Come on in. So a year later, because I teach sales training based on personality and facial recognition techniques, and I teach speaking so people can get out into the community and talk about the things that they're passionate about so that they can actually enjoy what they're doing and meet more people who can then become clients. And I teach people how to write and get published and have six-figure incomes. So Jerry was coming to my speaking classes and he was so proud of himself. He comes in a year later and he's got his one sheet, which is like your picture and what you talk about, your contact information, so that people who are going to book you for speaking know why they would want to book you for a speaking engagement. And he was so excited. And there's a couple seats up front if you want. And I looked at this picture, I said, Jerry, this isn't you. And he said, what do you mean? He says, I really like this. And I said, but this is too stoic. This is not approachable. This picture doesn't represent who you truly are. And he thought about it, and he said, well, that's my smile. And it was like the, you know, I mean, that's pretty bad, right? But people who don't know how to smile from the heart. And I said, I want you to remember when your daughter was 4 years old and you had been gone all day, and you open the front door and you put your briefcase down, and your daughter runs full speed ahead and jumps into your arms, and he just beamed. And I said, that's the smile I want to see on your picture. The next month, he came to the meeting, and he said, my wife, Dorothy, said I have to thank you. And I said, for what? And he said, because I'm finally the man again that she married. That corporate environment steals from our soul. Right? It takes away from who we are. It robs us from being free to be who we are truly meant to be. Right? Because you have to protect yourself in corporate life. I worked for 8.5 years for a company called CompuGraphic in Hayward. It was owned by Agfa Gavard, who owned, or Bear Aspirin owned Agfa Gavard. There was a